Hello, I'm Dennis Morganson, the Agent for Horticulture Education in Washington County. And today in the Wheelbarrow Series class, we're going to talk about how to create a monarch butterfly habitat. There is a need for butterfly gardens and for habitat for pollinators in general. The decline of the monarch and other pollinators isn't new information. We've all heard this for years that the populations have declined. Some years it's been less than others. But the monarch is the flagship species, like the honeybee, that if we preserve their habitats or add them, we are helping a lot of other organisms and other pollinators as well. In recent years, the monarch has made a little bit of a comeback, mainly because of gardeners and groups and states have added some milkweed and some other habitat for pollinators, specifically for monarchs. But that also has helped the other pollinators as well. For identifying the monarch, you can see the monarch butterflies there on top, sometimes also called the milkweed butterfly because that's what the larvae eat. Then on the bottom there is the viceroy. You'll see the viceroy probably a lot more common than monarchs, especially around here. But if you look how to tell the difference in them, because they're so similar, the viceroy is kind of mimicking the monarch and with those patterns to tell the predators that they're poisonous. But if you look at the veins there on the lower part of the wings, you'll see that the viceroy has a little semicircle on each wing there in the veins that runs across. The monarch doesn't have that little crossing black mark. So if it's just straight down veins in the wings, then you know it's a monarch. If you've got two monarchs or three or whatever, and you want to know the gender of them, the easiest way is the male has two little spots on the lower parts of each lower wing, and that's the main difference between the two. You may see a few other differences, but for the most part, that's how you tell if it's a male or a female. Got two little black spots there, one on each side is the male. So species characteristics, the monarch needs no camouflage because it is poisonous to predators. In fact, the vivid color is designed to ward off critters and birds to tell them, hey, I'm poisonous, I don't taste good, leave me alone. This is because the monarch, when it develops, the larva eats milkweed. Milkweed is a euphorbia that milky sap that comes out of the milkweed is actually poisonous, and the monarch actually can eat that and tolerate that toxin, and it keeps that toxin in its body to make it poisonous to other creatures like the birds. These chemicals remain permanently in the monarch system even after the caterpillar goes through metamorphosis. So that caterpillar is eating that toxin and it's keeping it in its body, and it even goes through the whole chrysalis period and everything to turn into an actual monarch. The monarch survival is closely linked to this chemical defense system, and also the fact that that bright color lets other creatures know that, hey, I'm no good, I'm dangerous, leave me alone. The diet of the monarch caterpillar is the reason that some of its dwindling is, majority of the dwindling is because of, as a caterpillar, they only eat milkweed leaves. So there's no other plant species it eats when it's a caterpillar, so it has to have that milkweed. And if the milkweed population's gone, the monarch butterfly's gone. The adult monarch butterflies eat nectar from flowers, which that are about 20% sugar. The habitat for monarchs is mainly in prairies, meadows, roadsides, and grasslands. They do prefer an open area. The larvae live and feed exclusively on milkweed plants, but the butterflies hang out on a variety of different plants, a lot of different flowers. The monarch eggs are deposited on the milkweed plant, and the caterpillars live on the plant, eating the leaves. If you've got milkweed, let these little caterpillars feed. There's no reason to try to control them or move them around. Obviously, you're wanting monarchs, or you wouldn't be listening to this PowerPoint. But the milkweed is a very tough plant. It'll be fine if it gets completely defoliated. Monarch butterflies live all over North America. The northernmost populations migrate south for the winter. Entomologists have divided the migratory populations into two groups. Those west of the Continental Divide, which the butterflies cannot fly over, which is they winter in California, And those eastward wait out the winter in large colonies south of the freeze line in Mexico on fir trees. Monarchs may travel up to 3,000 miles on each leg of their journey, and that can take up to 2 months. Scientists think they use the position of the sun to tell them when to head for Mexico and how to get there. So it's kind of like an instinctive thing in these butterflies. Also, they think they use the Earth's magnetic field to help them figure out where to go. Uh, in 1975 was the first time people learned where they migrated for the winter. Before that, we just knew they migrated, but then they figured out or found their, I guess, hiding spot or overwintering spot in 1975 in Mexico. Here's a migration chart here. You can see they overwintered pretty far down into Mexico, and you'll see as spring starts and it starts to warm up, they slowly start to move north again, all the way into Canada. And you can see the western population there, they overwinter in California, and then they summer in all parts of the west, even up into um, Canada. And you can see there they can't fly over the Continental Divide, which is the mountainy areas, because it's too high. So that's the reason we have kind of two distinct populations or groups of monarchs. So the monarch migration is kind of interesting. In February and March, the hibernating monarchs in Mexico and Southern California kind of reawaken, become active, they'll find a mate, and they'll begin their flight northward. And then they'll lay their eggs, and they'll die. Those eggs will hatch, they'll eat milkweed, and then they'll grow into adults, and they'll form another generation. And that generation will keep moving northward through March and April, laying eggs as they go. Those butterflies will die, and then they lay eggs. Their eggs will grow into caterpillars and adult butterfly, and they keep going gradually further north and having new generations. And they'll have multiple generations in the areas that they are in as well. But you can see there, and by September, October, the last generation would be born. And this generation doesn't die. It actually does the migrating and goes south into Mexico and Southern California. It's kind of interesting that they do this every year. Several generations move north, several generations move back south. But those later ones will actually, further north, they'll start leaving in September. Further south, they'll start leaving in October until the whole group is finally back into southern Mexico or Southern California. This is a picture from the butterflies in Mexico after they arrive, or these are getting ready to migrate back out of Mexico. The weather's warming up, and they're getting ready to set out on their new journey back north. Here you can see a picture of the Ojamel fir trees, which is Abies religiosa. This fir tree lives in the mountains in Mexico, where they have cool winters and cool summers. These monarchs hang on these branches and are kind of in a dormant state through the winter. You can see their wings are pretty much closed to conserve body heat. There's also been some research done where these trees actually are a little warmer than other trees, and it helps them overwinter. The lifespan of the monarchs, most monarchs only live a few weeks after mating and laying eggs. It is the great-grandchildren of the monarchs traveling north that make up the return trip. So there's multiple generations in one season. The last generation, born in late August, is the migratory generation. And then the shorter days and cooler temperatures of autumn prevent the butterflies from maturing enough to reproduce. So they're kind of in a juvenile stage, I guess teenage stage, while they're overwintering. This is about how come they can live 8 to 9 months and long enough to fly south for the winter and back again to reproduce. The total time frame for one butterfly's life cycle or one generation is about 6 to 8 weeks. So we go from egg, caterpillar, chrysalis to butterfly in that time frame. It then munches the milkweed or eats the milkweed and grows as a monarch caterpillar, which is the larva stage, for about 2 more weeks. And then the caterpillar forms the pupa or chrysalis, and it stays in that for about 10 days until it hatches or until it emerges, I should say, as an actual butterfly. So here's some pictures of the life cycle. On the top left there, you can see the tiny little egg there. And then on the right, top there is the monarch caterpillar. They're very distinct, black, white, and yellow. They're very easy to see on the plants. And then we have the pupa down there on the bottom left is kind of the cocoon that the caterpillar spins, and then it metamorphoses in complete metamorphosis, I should say, into the actual butterfly there on the right. You can see even as a caterpillar, it has very bright colors. Again, that is to warn predators that, hey, I'm no good for you. I'm poison, leave me alone. So the actual monarch decline is due to several factors. Um, Milkweed and nectar sources are declining for several reasons, but mainly due to widespread herbicide use in croplands, pastures, and roadsides. About 90% of all milkweed slash monarch habitat occurs within the agricultural landscape, which you'd expect. I would hate to say this, but probably glyphosate and some of these chemicals that are total kills for all species is pushing some of this habitat loss. Um, Also, we have genetically modified crops. Milkweeds survive tilling, but they don't reply. They don't uh, survive multiple rounds of glyphosate. Brand name is Roundup, if you're wondering what glyphosate is. Also, roadside management is and spraying and mowing has reduced a lot of the monarch habitat as well. If you look around you as you're driving up and down the road or in the country, you'll notice a lot of the actual milkweed you see is in fence rows. So if people would leave wouldn't spray glyphosate or any of those down their fence rows, that's where a lot of that milkweed is still doing just fine. But I understand people want to keep those fence rows clean as well. So it doesn't hurt to leave some areas with the milkweed, even in fields, just mow around that area and let the milkweed grow. If several people did that, several farmers did that, we would have a lot more milkweed. Um, Also, we're here to talk about monarch habitat. So we're going to talk about some things that you can do as a homeowner or a gardener as well. So what can you do to help monarchs? First off, we need to create habitat, conserve habitat, and above all else, protect milkweed. Without the milkweed, the larvae have nothing to eat, so you'll have no adult monarchs and the species is lost. Also, we're going to need nectar sources for the adult uh, monarchs so that they'll have a food source while they're laying eggs. Some groups have started monarch way stations, which is just a fancy word for monarch habitats. Um, these have been done in home gardens, schools, businesses, parks, zoos. I've even heard of somebody brought to attention to me the other day that Raising Cane's restaurant actually puts in a little pollinator garden with every restaurant, depending on how much room they have, which is kind of cool. Not necessarily just for monarchs, but if it's for pollinators, monarchs are going to be there because we have nectar sources at least. But the only difference between creating a monarch and a butterfly habitat is monarchs have to have the milkweed as the larval source. Um, Without a major effort to restore milkweed to as many locations as possible, we're going to continue to have monarch losses. So we just need to be cognizant of the fact that we all want a nice clean fence row or roadside, but sometimes we need to leave some areas for nature to survive. So you want to determine the size and location of your monarch habitat. Butterfly plants, most plants that butterflies like, generally require full sun. There's really no required size, but the Monarch Watch group suggests a minimum of 100 square feet. The total area can be split up into several locations. All the plants for monarchs and butterflies don't have to be in one bed or a central location. However, planting in clumps by species, by color, by nectar times, that will all help increase more monarchs to that area because they don't have to fly all over the place to get a nectar here and there. When they have a large group of flowers, it's a lot more enticing to them. Also, butterflies in general are attracted to particular colors of flowers, particularly red, orange, yellow, and purple. So, some ways to develop monarch habitat: you can plant 10 or more milkweed plants. That's the must. You have to have the milkweed if you're going to have habitat for monarchs. A monarch uh, habitat requires a minimum of 10 milkweed plants, which is preferably 2 or more species. Also, by planting more species of milkweed, you get different bloom times too, which is good for your garden. Milkweeds that bloom at different times increase the chance of seeing monarchs over a longer period as well, because even by blooming, that's also a nectar source for your monarch. There are several types and species of milkweed out there. Some of the more common ones, and the ones that you're probably going to look to have in your garden, is number one is the butterfly milkweed. That's Asclepias tuberosa. That plant blooms earlier in the spring, and you'll see it on even on the sides of the roads and things. Still, it's a native plant, but it can come in mainly orange is the color, the wild type, but you can also buy the yellow blooming types. It's a smaller plant, less aggressive than some of these other forms. It's a good perennial plant for your garden, however. And then number two, we have swamp milkweed. This has a nice little pink flower on it, which swamp, it likes wet areas, doesn't mean it has to have wet areas to grow. And then number three there is the common milkweed, the one you see most often, the one that is pretty tough, and you'll see that a lot of times in fence rows and things. And it has survived a couple rounds of glyphosate. It can, I should say, because it has a pretty big root system. It's multiple rounds of it that cause the issues. And then we look at number four is the purple milkweed, which is a beautiful darker purple flower. Probably compared to flower-wise, it's probably as pretty as most of your perennials are going to be. And then we have number five there is the prairie milkweed. It's a nice little plant as well. You also need to have nectar sources for these butterflies. You need to plant a minimum of four. You need plants that bloom throughout the growing season as well. Uh, the nectar is all the adult butterflies eat, so you've got to have that out there. They can be annuals, they can be biennials, perennials, trees, shrubs, wildflowers, doesn't matter. They just need something that's throughout the growing season. You'll also help out all the other pollinators by having these nectar sources as well. Fall blooming plants are a must, though, if you want to help the monarch. Asters are one of the last groups of plants with a lot of nectar that gives these butterflies the energy to fly south or to migrate. So you make sure you have asters in your landscape. Other native butterflies such as buckeyes and red admirals also love asters. And also native perennials attract more butterflies because butterflies developed over the millennia with these native plants. Some more examples of nectar plants and some that can spread throughout the growing season. Number one is spice bush. It's a really early blooming plant, which gives you that really early nectar source. And then we had wild lupin, which I don't have a picture of it here. I'm sorry. And we have button bush. Number two is also pretty early blooming. That's over there on the side there. And then coneflower for the summer. And then Joe Pye weed for the later in the summer, which are all good sources for these. Coneflower is native, Joe Pye weed's native. Then we have Coreopsis down there. Coreopsis, several varieties of that out there that you can plant. Blazing Star is another one that's really nice. It's more of a prairie plant. Black-eyed Susan, which we all probably have those in our garden as well. And then we have stiff goldenrod. There's lots of different species of goldenrod. A lot of native or wild goldenrod out there as well. If you want to put goldenrod in your garden, though, you want to pick a clumping form. Our native ones that you see, the most common native ones, are pretty aggressive. So if you get those in your garden, they're going to take it over pretty quickly. Then we have the New England aster there at number 7, which is very important. Those asters, again, are the ones that give you that late nectar source. And then, believe it or not, ironweed. I know a lot of people with wild livestock don't like ironweed in the pastures, but ironweed is a great butterfly and monarch plant. So some management practices that you can do to encourage more monarchs. You need to manage the density of plants. You want to plant relatively close together though, but not crowded. That'll give you some, provide some shelter for the caterpillars and the chrysalis, and also kind of keep away some of the predators and the elements, believe it or not. If you have wide open plants and we have thunderstorms with beating rain, it can actually knock those caterpillars down and can kill some of them. Eliminate the use of insecticides and herbicides. That's the big one, especially on plants where you think there may be larvae. So Basically, you're just not going to spray your milkweed. But even the nectar source plants, you got to watch what you spray on those. You can remove old growth before the growing season, preferably in the spring. That way you can get rid of all that extra branches and things that may be in your perennial beds. Other things you need to do, monarchs don't just need plants, they need a habitat. So to do that, you want to provide a few flat rocks for the butterflies to sun on if the weather's cool. They'll warm their wings up where they can fly. Also, you want to provide a shady spot or for resting when the weather is hot so the monarchs can regulate their body temperature. These are living beings, so they get hot and they get cold and they have to warm up and cool down, just like we do. And also, you do want to provide some form of windbreak. Very windy area is really hard on some of these adult butterflies. So large trees and shrubs will help do that and kind of knock some of that wind speed down, especially if you're in a very windy area. Water is another biggie. Obviously, these butterflies can fly, but if they don't have to fly very far, they're going to stay in your habitat area. So they do need water. You can do this with bird baths or faucet features that allow butterflies to puddle, which is basically a little mud puddle area. You can do this by just putting a little tray out with some sand in it, a little water. Basically, the sand's just wet, or even the mud's just wet, and the butterflies can land on that. In the picture, you can see they're kind of in like a little creek bed there where it's muddy and they're drinking water. They also get nutrients and things from the soil when they do that. If you ever noticed around a mud puddle, you'll see a lot of butterflies on the mud. They're actually getting nutrients from that mud, and they're getting a little water there too. Another thing, you do want to provide some sturdy shelter places to pupate, which basically they need something solid to pupate on. That can be rocks, it can be branches, it could be fence posts, but this is just a picture to show you where some of these caterpillars actually will choose to pupate. You can see even on the side of a flower pot there, under the railing of the deck, even attached to a wooden bench. But they like a sturdy area to actually pupate on. So if you have any questions about monarchs, you can always call me at the extension office at 859-336-7741. You can also check out some of these sources here about the Monarch Butterfly USA, Kentucky Garden Club, Monarch Watch, and also even the Kentucky Department of Wildlife has a great pamphlet on monarchs. Again, if you have any questions, you can call me at the extension office at 859-336-7741. Happy gardening!